Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 148. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, November the 16th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. My essay today has to do with something that's very near and dear to my heart, and should be near and dear to the heart of all listeners. And it has to do with free speech. And it has to do with free speech not only in this country, but worldwide. And the, assumption is that most of the Western world, in fact, all of the Western world has free speech just like we do here in the good old US of A. In actuality, nothing could be further from the truth. We have unbelievable rights here in this country, rights that are not shared with Western Europeans, that are not shared in the United Kingdom, and are not even shared in our friendly neighbors to the north, Canada. But I'll get into that later, and I will show you why we have freedoms like we have in this country. And I'm going to explain some of the freedoms that other people, when it comes to speech, that other people in other countries do not have. And there was actually a story in the news in Canada about a broadcaster who was fired that I'll build on that as well. But before we go on to that, a couple of things that I picked up this week, a couple of things that I learned just recently. One of them I actually learned last week. One I learned this week. And what I learned last week was the definition of the term jet black. Okay. Now, it doesn't matter how old you are, you're always going to learn if you keep your mind open. The term jet black, especially when it comes to a person's hair, and you've heard the term, she has jet black hair. He has jet black hair. I had always heard that term used, and I made the assumption that jet black was, black like the exhaust that comes out of a jet airplane. I mean, once upon a time, it used to be very black. Not anymore. They've cleaned up the engines in the planes considerably. But that's what I assumed that jet black meant, okay? And then I was reading The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, written in the 1830s or 40s. When there were no jet airplanes. So jet black actually means there's a stone called a jet stone, and it's like an onyx or an obsidian. It's a very black stone, and that's where the term jet black came from. Now, many of you may have already known that, but I didn't. And by reading one of the great works of art published back in the 1840s, I learned that, okay? Also, everybody listening to this podcast, virtually everybody, I guess, probably has a cell phone, okay? And one of the biggest controversies in the cell phone world now is the new 5G network. Okay, we had 3G, then we had 4G, now we have LTE, now we have 5G. In many places, especially many metropolitan areas, we have 5G service. And they say it's good. It's a whole lot quicker than LTE. It's a whole lot quicker than many internet providers, okay? So you're thinking to yourself, wow, my phone says I'm getting 5G service, so my phone should be quicker, right? Probably not. And you think to yourself, wait a minute, I've read all this stuff about 5G. It's supposed to be so much quicker. Are these people lying to us? No, they're not lying to you at all. In fact, 5G service is much quicker than 4G. It's much quicker than LTE, okay? But just because your phone says I'm getting 5G service doesn't mean that your phone is accepting that 5G service. In fact, almost no current cell phones use 5G services. The latest Samsung, I think, does, the one that came out last month. No iPhone uses 5G. You can't use it. It won't take it. I just learned this yesterday. Maybe the cell phone that Apple comes out with in September 2020 might accept 5G service, but then again, it might not. So if you have your cell phone and you say, wow, I'm getting 5G service, but this doesn't seem to be any faster than my LTE, it's because your phone probably doesn't recognize the 5G service. So there you go. You'll learn it from the strong man. I told you I'm going to do my essay on freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of you and I to say whatever the heck we want. Before we do that, I want to get into the podcast. Are you enjoying the podcast? Statistics say that you are. Trying to get guests on whenever I can. Occasionally I'll do it solo, as I am this morning. But again, trying to diversify, trying to mix it up, trying to give you folks something on the podcast that you don't get anywhere else. Okay? That's the goal. I think I'm accomplishing that goal. I hope you're enjoying it. If you are, I appreciate the emails. Some of you send me emails. I appreciate them when I get them. Feedback, suggestions. I do take them sometimes. I do consider them all the time. Please understand, if you give me a suggestion and I thank you for it and then I don't act on it, doesn't mean I don't welcome the suggestion. But it may mean that I maybe don't think that the podcast needs to go into that direction. Or I think it's a good idea. So I try to get a guest on to discuss this with, and I have troubles getting somebody to commit because I'm a very busy person, as are virtually all the people. In fact, I will say as are all the people that I have as guests on the podcast. So they, like me, are trying to fit the 10 pounds of stuff into the 5-pound bag, okay? And sometimes they don't have any more luck than I do. So please continue the suggestions, continue the emails. I do respond to all emails, and they're all appreciated as well. How do you get the podcast? Easy. The easiest way, send me an email, jamesstrongshow@hotmail.com. That's the easiest way. You send me an email, then I go ahead and put you on the James Strong Show podcast friends list. And upon publication, I email you a link, you download it, and you listen to it at your leisure. You can also get the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Facebook, Twitter, TuneIn, Radio Online, the podcast app, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, CastBox, SoundCloud, and, as always, at my host, Spreaker.com. That's Spreaker, Spreaker.com. Lots of ways to get the podcast. The most surprising of all of those is YouTube. I mean, I don't have a YouTube video on there, but you can listen to the podcast on YouTube. Put up YouTube and let it run in the background, and you see my dopey face, and you can listen to the podcast. But again, it's not a video podcast. But more people than I would ever thought listen to the podcast on YouTube. Amazing. Okay, let's get into the essay. It has to do with free speech, and I'm going to ease into this, as I always do. I like to ease into the essay to give you kind of set the story, set the pace, okay? First of all, as always, this is a essay on the podcast. It's my opinion, but it's my opinion based in fact. Sources I use for today's essay include USA Today, Vox.com, The Huffington Post, the Canadian Library of Parliament, the UK Guardian, and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee website. Okay. First, I'm going to start off by giving you folks some information. This is not something that I'm advertising on the podcast. This is not something that is on the headline when you read it. And it's 9 minutes into the podcast, so I've kind of buried it smack dab in the middle of the podcast. But it does have to do with free speech. And years ago, when I was on the radio, I was fussing about the media, and one of the owners of the radio station took me aside, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "You do know that you're part of the media, don't you?" And in essence, he was right. So I changed that from, instead of saying the media, I say traditional media sources, as I am not a traditional media source. But in a stretch of the imagination, I am part of the media, okay? And on these whole Trump impeachment hearings, okay, the whole thing you hear is, well, there's this whistleblower that they have. This is a guy who was embedded in the Trump cabinet at least his campaign or his office, and he came back and said, hey, listen to all this stuff that he got. And you hear the whistleblower, the whistleblower, the whistleblower. Who is the whistleblower? Well, we're not going to give you his name because, we really don't need to. In my opinion, if you're going to accuse somebody of something, then the accused needs to know his accuser. Now, legally, that's not the case. He doesn't have to know his accuser, at least not in a hearing like we're having right now. A trial, yes. A hearing, no. So legally, you don't need to know the name of the whistleblower. Everybody in the media knows it, but nobody is telling you who the whistleblower is. Guess what? I'm going to do it. That's right. On this dopey podcast. You're not going to get this on CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC, any place. You're not going to get this any place. You're not going to get this on Rush Limbaugh. You're not going to get this on Rachel Maddow. You're not going to get this anywhere except for the James Strong Show. The whistleblower, his name is Eric Ciaramella. Eric Ciaramella. Now, where did I get this information? Donald Trump Jr. actually tweeted it out. And then he yanked back the tweet for whatever reason, but it was captured. Breitbart.com published his name. And a website called Real Clear Investigations also published his name. Now, unless you're going to one of those rather obscure websites, with the exception of Breitbart, who looks at Donald Trump Jr.'s tweets and who looks at realclearinvestigations.com, not many people. I did. I got it, and I have it. Eric Ciaramella. And here's what I found out about him. He was part of an Obama administration email chain celebrating the eventual signing of a $1 billion U.S. loan and guarantee to the Ukraine, back during the Obama administration. Sound familiar? Isn't that kind of what they're talking about that Trump was doing, dealings with the Ukraine? But that and other emails do show that Ciaramella interfaced about Ukraine with individuals who played key roles in facilitating the infamous anti-Trump dossier produced by the Fusion GPS and reportedly financed by the Hillary Rodham Clinton presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee. That's who this guy is. Basically, he's a Democratic operative who the CIA put into Donald Trump's campaign or cabinet or just his circle of people who needed to know. Okay. And now he's out there. His name is Eric Ciaramella. You heard it on the James Strong Show. Isn't that nice? That, my friends, is free speech and what it's all about. And that's the precursor to the essay. Number 2, did you hear about, and this is what caused me to decide to do a podcast on free speech. Free speech in the United States, of all places. Pardon me while I take a sip of water. But Don Cherry, if you're not a Canadian or at least a hockey fan, you probably never heard of the guy, okay? He was or I guess he still is or was. He's 85 years old, first of all. And he was a broadcaster on a Canadian hockey show, okay? He had a hockey sports program, okay? And he was a former player. He was a former coach. He's 85 years old. He's a flamboyant, bombastic, sharp-dressing, opinionated guy, okay? Knows a lot about hockey, but he was a very opinionated guy. And he said something on the television the other day that was considered racist, and they fired him for saying something racist. You can't speak racist on the television. You can't speak hatefully on the television or radio in Canada. In fact, you can't speak hatefully in public in Canada or in the UK. And when I say hatefully, I'm going to read you the actual thing that Don Cherry said. I don't consider it racist. In this country, it really wouldn't even be considered very controversial. But in Canada, not only is it considered hateful and controversial, it's against the law. In other words, this was not a bunch of people who wanted to get rid of this guy. He said something somewhat controversial, so they fired